father was an evangelical minister. He was a Bible-toting, good Christian boy. And in Wheaton, he volunteered for daytime relief school teaching in Chicago. And he went to the Cabrini Queens, the worst slums in Chicago. And that Goldwater Republican, for those who remember AU H2064, all of a sudden saw poverty. He saw children in a war zone. He saw pain like he had never experienced it before in his life. And in 3 weeks, he became a progressive and went to work for Saul Alinsky's Northwest Community Organization. That kind of political shift from conservatism all the way to progressivism was caused by a major emotional impact. When we're talking to people about liberty, about freedom, what we need to also look at is the emotional impact on their lives and their current neurological structures. Now, I do a lot of work with hedge fund managers and money managers. And what I look at is the neuroscience of the brain, how we change our behaviors, how we adapt. And when we're talking to people who have their survival connected to a particular political structure, and we talk to them about an issue of gun control, for example, or we talk to them an issue about health care, or we talk to them about an issue of medical marijuana, we end up with an argument, but it doesn't create any light. And that's because their belief system is hooked to their survival mechanism. When we're young, we create mechanisms to survive and to thrive. And these mechanisms I've labeled neurological metastructures. And if you know anything about the brain, it has millions and billions of brain cells. And each one of those connected to other brain cells. And there's trillions of connections. In fact, there's more connections in our brain than there are stars in our galaxy. And these connections create our ability to navigate a very complex world because they automate a lot of things by creating neurological structures that take over our brains. For example, when I learned to drive, and it was a clutch, I put in the clutch, I put on the brake, I put it in gear, I let out the clutch, I put on the gas. I concentrated very hard on it all. But now I can drive a stick shift in the freeway and have a conversation about political theory. Why? Because neurological structures have taken over. And when we were young, we created neurological structures to thrive and to survive sometimes some very hostile environments. And those that, because we did survive, we replicate those. We replicate behaviors that are even no longer useful to us simply because they're connected to our very survival. So I'm having a conversation about gun control. Are we going to have an agreement about it? Not likely. Because if your survival mechanism means means an environment where it's more important to have an outcome than it is to have personal freedom, and I'm asking you then to be threaten your very survival, our conversation isn't going to go anywhere. There's two basic extremes that we can look at. One of them is looking at opportunity. And in opportunity, we don't look at outcomes. We look for the process. We look at individual freedom. We look at our ability to negotiate others and to create communities, to create relationships. And we create relationships that work. And relationships that work are repeated. We create companies. We create businesses. Those that work thrive and are copied. Those that don't die of their own. If we look at the other side of that spectrum, we want certainty. And in that certainty, we want certain outcomes. And the outcomes are peace, harmony, social justice. We want to be able to know what that outcome is. We want to end racism. We want to end hunger. And as a result, we're willing to create a hierarchical system with outcomes, with power at the top of that to determine the outcomes and then to enforce our behaviors to create those outcomes. So if your safety is certainty-based, and I come along, Mr. Freedom and Mr. Independence, and say, hey, let's let everyone smoke marijuana. Hey, let's let everybody carry a gun. Hey, let's let everybody worry about their own medical insurance. How do you think that's going to go over? It's not, because it's connected to your very survival. If, on the other hand, you tell me that, no, you can't own a gun, if you tell me that no, you're going to be forced to pay into Obamacare medical insurance. And I, as a freedom guy, how am I going to act? That's connected to my survival. Am I going to have a reasonable discussion with you? So the question is, how do we create reasonable discussions when each of us, our survival mechanism, is on a very different side of the spectrum? There are several ways we can do this. The first way is to acknowledge that our beliefs are models and maps. The map is not reality, but a lot of us, especially for those of us like when I was religious, my map was real. People were going to hell. Jesus was the Son of God. But now I look at it and I say that was a model. Do I still believe that same model or map? No, I've changed. Will my map or model be different 10 years from now? Probably so. So what we can do is when you're in a conversation, you can say to somebody, hey, well right now your model of the world, your map of the world believes that if you have a real political structure that can ensure these things, that you'll be happier and safer. And they will say yes. Well, my map of the world. Now, you can sit next to them, and you can put your maps and models up there. You can discuss them. But what you've done is you've made a step to separating them, their intelligence, their individuality, from that particular map or model. And you can start to talk about it. You can ask them about what having that map or model, what does that do for you? How do you, and you can drill down on their beliefs. Well, what it does for me, it makes me feel safer. Well, what do you want then? What's your goal then, is to feel safer? Yeah, my goal is to feel safer. You know, I want that too. I want to feel safer. And then you can start having a conversation. Another way is to build rapport. Build rapport by using the same words and language, specifically the keywords. If you're talking to somebody about gun control and they're going, wow, if everybody could just carry a gun, it would be chaos. So what you need to do is avoid chaos and say the word in the same way so that they can understand that you really get what they say. So what we've done is we've turned our beliefs into maps and models. We've sat next to them. We've discussed our maps and models out there. And even if we don't make a change, if we've made one point, is to remove that belief, like my religious belief when I was younger, to remove that to a map or model, we've made a big difference. And needless to say, if somebody is on the different side of the spectrum as we are, they're not going to come screaming over to us and become a libertarian and vote the way we want to tomorrow. But we can make an incremental difference if we can just remove them, if we can get them to look at their beliefs as a map that they've chosen. You can do the example of, you know, did you believe the same thing 20, 30 years ago? No. Did you believe the same thing 10 years ago? No. Will you believe exactly the same thing 10 years from now? Well, no. Okay, we've got a map that's working for us. Let's see how we can make it work better. So in our conversations, the biggest problem is going to be triggered. I do this all the time. The person on the other side of the conversation will say, well, I think all guns should be controlled. Alrighty, I'm thinking, my God, once the guns are controlled, what's going to happen? Only the government and the bad guys have guns. My God, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm feeling threatened. I can't defend my family. Oh my God! And then I start yelling and screaming, and they start yelling and screaming. I remember I was at a party in Ross. Everybody know Ross? There was a mansion in Ross. This was many, many years ago. And I was in a discussion, all political liberals in the party, and cocktails and hors d'oeuvres, and he said something that I disagreed with, and he said, "You are a racist." Whoa, did I get triggered. I started yelling, he started yelling, and believe me, I was never invited back to that house again. It was but we get triggered, and if our survival mechanism is triggered, and then we start reacting from that survival mechanism, are we going to have a positive conversation? Are we going to be able to move them a little bit? Probably not. So if we can avoid that, if we can separate people's beliefs as a map and model, get next to them and discuss it, we have a chance to move them forward. And I'd just like to thank the candidates here tonight. I'd like to thank you so much for giving of your time to help move people incrementally, to believe that we can make a difference, to believe that we're actually going to tap into that libertarian belief that people have. So my congratulations to everybody that's worked so hard, and my appreciations. And especially thank you, Lynette, for all your work, and thank you, Paul, for putting this together.
Sure. Thank you, Rich.